I derived the meaning of consciousness from Roy Baumeister's course in the Big Ideas of Psychology, because he laid it out there that we are different to animals, and the reason for that is because we think of the future, whereas animals don't.
Being able to see farther into the future isn't really, at no point do you make that leap from just better causal decisions to conscious or free will conscious decisions. I started recording again.
Yeah, the reason why I asked this is because you can have that, you can apply philosophy in the, there are some testimonies that people says this, and there are, you can observe certain commentator and how they go on, because for me, I do have, I'm not saying that Candace Owens is what she was saying is valid, but what I'm saying is what I'm you see her is she doesn't, I don't think I mean, she may be creating conspiracies, but I don't think so. I think she's genuinely investigating on what's going on, because she heard some incongruence on the evidence that's being provided. One example is, they said that, she claimed that there are many people that receive text message from Charlie saying that, he felt that he's going to be killed the next day, and that wasn't put out in the public as an evidence. So she questions that. So for me, it's fair for a person to question that. Why does the head TPUSA members, not, maybe it's none of the public's concern, but if you are, Charlie Kirk has a lot of dear fans, so I think if you kind of hide that to the public, then it is kind of inevitable that people are gonna, call it out, right? Secondly, I think I'm a big fan of Shapiro, but I think what he did in the show, um, in the TPUSA recent show was, I think that was out of line. He's calling her out as a liar, and it's kind of like he got into this feeling state rather than, arguing at her. I think that was just so not him. Which I don't know. I think it just kind of adds to the conspiracy. Why was he suddenly upset and suddenly just calling her out as, instead of defending the case, right? So kind of like silencing her, which I don't think, which was never been at all before. So yeah, again, this is kind of like how, you can apply those philosophical ideas, and, some testimony, empirical evidence, and criticism, to how you kind of critically analyze the situation. Because certainly in the quad there's a lot of hatred towards Candice. I actually don't. I'm not saying that she's a valid person, what she's saying is valid, but I just, for me there's a lot of, empirically, for me there's a lot of risk for her, but she still continues to do it. She has children. She has, the main argument of Shapiro is he's making money out of it, but Shapiro also kind of does the same thing. Like, he's making money out of, you know out of out of the Daily Wire. He also does the same job. So for me, that's kind of, yeah. I just wonder what your thoughts are there.
Yeah. Well, this is very interesting to go into. So I'll parallel this. I noticed Theo Vaughn was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he was talking about, he was sort of questioning certain things about the Jews or something, sort of having this sort of power, and Joe Rogan was sort of dismissing it again, and people were upset in the same way. Now, to clarify something though, when you say sort of Ben Shapiro is also making money, like they're both making money off it. So like, what's the difference though? I would say the difference is that like we don't know this because we're not actually in that place, but I would suspect that for celebrities, they do care about being celebrities that aren't being focused on, and celebrities which are in the public's attention, because I think even in their own circles, like being hot in that area, being the one that everybody wants to invite at that exact moment is like currency. It's not good enough just to be a celebrity. You've got to be
Mm,
also
mm.
popular in that
Competent.
exact time.
Yeah.
And so
Mm,
I would say that what she gets, she already was making money before, but I would say she's getting that heat. Like she's way more uh a name people talk about right now. You and me are talking about her because she's doing this. So there's like high incentive, high motivation to do that. That's
mm. But even if the risk is so high, even if the risk is too high, because
but
people
you're
can file
taking
lawsuits.
but you're
They can
taking as
file.
a
Yeah, sorry.
you're starting from the position that she's correct though. If she's wrong, then there's no risk at all really.
But the president, the French president's wife, is filing a lawsuit defamation against her, and she doubles down. I'm not sure if you heard of it. So
Oh,
Candace
I heard
Owens is
about that.
saying,
Yeah.
yeah, that the wife of Marken is a man, and she's filing a lawsuit against her for defamation, but she doubles down. And
That's
the wife is not providing any evidence at all.
now
So
that's a completely different situation than the Charlie Kirk one. Yeah, you present a good argument there. That's like
yeah,
because those
yeah,
lawsuits, I know what happened with Alex Jones is like he
yeah, yeah,
his what he lost in that was more money than he can ever earn. So he's in debt for his entire life because of his lawsuit, because of defamation. It's very
yeah,
serious. He's like $1 billion in debt.
yeah,
There's and so yeah, defamation lawsuits are no joke. That's a
yeah,
very good point.
yeah, yeah. So and even then, her kids can be targeted, her husband can be targeted. Um, I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive of the political the celebrity world. Maybe they do that like kind of like a high risk, high return venture where
Maybe.
they get more money.
Well, I
Um,
don't know, like, so, like, I don't know the exact case. So, like, if she's like, does she outright say that this person is not a woman, that she's a man, or does
yeah,
she sort of hint at it? She outright says that.
yeah, she says that. Yeah,
Yeah, that could be defamation if it's not true. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So she doubles down even in she recently came up and Piers Morgan's show. um but she doubled down and said, yeah, she's a man and this is his name. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just find it interesting that's going on there, and um the political world. But yeah, it's because for me, when I first heard of Charlie's assassination, I was quite not contented with the idea that it was just Tyler Robinson who killed Kirk. I know that I'm gonna go through the conspiracy, but it's like this is the same line of argument that she was making. She's like similar to JFK. Like, do we believe that Oswald was a lone wolf that killed JFK? Right? I honestly don't believe that. I do think that there's something behind the scenes. Um, so I mean, we can only guess, like we can only speculate things until then. But what she was presenting were like evidence that are it was kind of like a mini lies that they were making, saying, like, for instance, Charlie Kirk never really liked Ben Shapiro, but it was what the TPUSA and the Daily Wire were saying that it's not actually true. And then Candace showed a text message, saying that that whatever Ben Shapiro is. So I just
Well,
thought to ask your opinion
now
about it.
I'll think of an alternative example because this is very, very interesting indeed. Um, I'll think of an alternative example, which I think is very, very valid as a conspiracy theory. So Sam Altman went on Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson sort of brought up this issue of somebody had died, and it was presented as a suicide, but there was
Oh yeah,
very,
I
very,
heard.
you know about this, yeah. So there's very
Yeah.
mysterious elements about it, like the blood being in a different room, like him ordering
Mm,
food before, like just many different things that were very, very bizarre about this. Now, there's a distinct difference between this one. I think is very credible. There's a distinct difference between this and then the other cases, and the distinct difference is that he was not a celebrity, and so like what happens with celebrities is that everybody knows them, and if you have somebody who's maybe a bit psychotic, uh, they could be thinking about this person, and so Joe Rogan had there's this guy called the Liver King who like went down to Austin, Texas, and was like making Instagram reels about him, a little bit scary, a little bit, but he was like focusing on him. It's very, very common for people to get stalkers and deranged people who follow them around or like try to meet them or additionally try to do crazy things. So, I mean, there's like the possibility for it to be something else, but it's also entirely possible for famous
Yeah,
people to be
100%.
hit by just sort of deranged
Yeah,
lunatics who happen to be focusing on them for some reason. And
yeah.
then there's an element to that, which is that I would say the reason, the same reason why you would pick a conspiracy theory that somebody like specifically hired a hitman to murder them would be the same reason why you would also think a fan would, because there's around Charlie Kirk's case exactly, there was a lot of people who didn't like him. And you could go, "Well, there's a lot of people who didn't like him. There's reason to hire somebody, but
Yeah,
a lot of people not liking him is also a reason for there to be sort of a zeitgeist or like a mental or like a collective conscious perspective of hatred towards him. Like, you could picture like, because I think he was in a Discord chat room or something. He was telling people like you can imagine if you're in a community of people that just hate somebody, like really hate them, and you start like
yeah.
internalizing this, and you start like this becomes something which is more than just your own thing, but other people also think the same thing. You
Yeah,
could see how that could also lead to, you know, that person doing the thing. They
yeah,
sort of become the unwitting
mm,
tool of the
yeah, yeah.
other people.
Well, yeah. It's certainly the case, but what I'm putting out as a um my reasoning on why I put it up here is I don't think it's the intention of the person to create a conspiracy theory. I think it's definitely it's kind of like a biological, no, a personality trait to be investigative, kind of like maybe skeptical of things naturally. Um, and maybe it just came across as conspiracy theory to some. Because certainly I also felt the same way when it was Tyler Robinson who allegedly killed Kirk, and it was, for me, it was just unacceptable. Not just that I just can't believe it, but if I am in the position of power, if I have the capacity to investigate, I would probably do the same thing. So I don't think, yeah, it's like, um, going back to philosophy and all that, we have this. Let me give an example, because um, am very skeptical, even to myself. Whenever I write something to the quad, so I'm moving one place to another, um, but it's connected. Trust me. When I'm writing something in the quad and have people liking me, I always ask myself, are the people liking me because they like me or they actually like my content, right? So, and what I did was I wrote a Karl Marx poem, and only a few people like that. So that implies that they actually like my content and they don't just like me. So I have that personality that I quite examine things thoroughly. I don't accept things as face value. If I can examine it, I will. Um, and going back to Carlson, and Candace Owens, because they're being heated, they're being bombarded by the other conservatives. I think they are genuinely seeking answers. They are genuinely investigating. There might be just creating something which is a possibility, but there could also be just something, you know, there might be just genuinely just skeptic about things. Um, yeah, because now Carlson is being labeled as a Nazi, as a secret Nazi, as an anti-Semite, when I don't think that was his intention at all, and I don't think you know it's fair for Ben Shapiro to be saying that to the public. I mean, he didn't say that Carlson is is a Nazi. Maybe he did. I'm not sure if he did. But he's saying that he invited Nick Fuentes, who's an anti-Semite, to his platform.
You're saying
And
Carlson,
which,
right? Tucker
yeah,
Carlson?
this is Carlson. Yeah,
Okay.
this is Carlson. Which he should be a bit more responsible to who he invites with. for me, that's kind of like contradictory to freedom of speech. Like if you certainly want, you don't silence people from their beliefs. Actually, you want to showcase it, so people can see what fantasy is saying, right? So they would know the difference between right and wrong. You don't silence them. Which I my word that's my word with Shapiro. So, yeah, yeah. Bottom line, in conclusion, I think there are some people who are just naturally just skeptical of things and they just won't accept it at face value. And there's certainly some people who are, um, who majority like people in the quad just accepts what TPUSA and the Daily War says, which I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I'm highly open to any level of conspiracy theory. Really, I'm very, very open. My sort of, method of discerning that I don't think it's valid comes just entirely from personal perception and just guessing. It's just a guess based on
Mm,
me reading people and like me looking, me understanding things. But I'm
yeah.
entirely open to the possibility that it is valid. Um, is there a
Mm,
danger in having people who are sort of radical in some way uh, on platforms? I don't. I think that the danger, again, we can analyze this with sort of philosophical tools. The danger of having people on these platforms is that it isn't even as much, I would say, that they will radicalize people. I would say the danger is more that they will distract people for,
mm,
I think that's a real danger, is that you
mm,
have, this is why I think that Joe Rogan sort of wasn't interested in Theo Vaughn's conspiracy theories, because he just, you view people get lost down these roads and you're just like, wow, you just go down that place and you spend so much time and effort in it. This is what I would say is probably the critical metric to analyze good
mm,
information, good sources versus bad sources, is like, how much do they give you that's like tangible that you can use versus how much do
mm,
they give you that's like really socially kind of a pyramid social thing,
mm,
where like, well, the importance of this depends on the importance of this social thing, which depends on the importance of this, kind of like uh Derrida kind of talks about language all just being sort of supporting its own thing. um
mm,
if you track back down to why somebody's doing something, does it just dissolve into like, well, they're doing it because this social person, and why is that social person? I think that's a danger, is people getting lost in
mm.
channels of information where it
Yeah,
never grounds into actually they're doing any important work. It's just all
yeah.
social.
Yeah, it would even you could even say that in individual level, you also kind of get lost to your own ideas, right? So it's we ourselves cannot know the truth, right? So if you know that, certainly other individuals as well can not know the truth, even though they are doing the best they can to put it out in the news as 100% true. Like you can't know actually what is true. So I'm just gonna put it out there because I do think that there are some kind of a simple-minded. No, no, simple-minded means kind of like undermining those people. I would say like a straight linear thinking of, oh, Daily War says this, therefore it's true. TPUSA says therefore it says true. I do want to deconstruct that, saying it you should be thinking outside of it, and kind of have your own independent thought, especially what I see in the quad. I'm not at all I mean, to an extent, yes, I'm criticizing the quad, but it's something that we have to be aware of. Like even ourselves are prone to self-deception, that we need to be a bit more vigilant and a bit more alert in terms of just accepting ideas from people. um yeah, so yeah, that's
I would propose the opposite as a solution. You say we have to be alert to not accept ideas that are erroneous, and I would say kind of the opposite, because
mm,
if you do that system of selecting ideas, um, then what's the criteria you use to select with them? There's a
mm,
turtles all the way down issue where, at no point do you have a clear
yeah.
metric.
So this is a problem in epistemology. So there's a Roman, Was he a philosopher? I don't know. But certainly he was part of the Senates, I think. He's called Sextus Empiricus, and he proposed an idea called, oh sorry, an argument or a confliction between two ideas called the problem of a criterion. So how can we know an idea, a knowledge is justified? Is it we pursue the instances of knowledge first, or do we have a criteria first and then we pursue? Sorry, do we pursue the instances of knowledge first and then we create the criteria based on that knowledge, or do we have a certain criteria of knowledge first before, or then we go after the instances of knowledge? So even up to now, that's still not. There's still no answer to this. Um, there's a recent modern philosopher called Chisholm, and he dived dived back to it. But no, it's true. It is, we can't. Um, do we need to have criteria first? I forgot where Descartes um is is leaning towards. I think he's more of a. I think Methodist is the first one, wherein we go with the instance, no, criteria first, and before we go to the instance. So for him, you need to have set of standards first. Um, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I do believe maybe it's just innately me that I go with the instances first before I categorize things.
There's
Um,
two levels that this works on. There's the social philosophical level. This is what Jordan
mm,
Peterson has largely addressed. This is where his argument to it is, well, the societies played out different models somewhat arbitrarily. Like there was no necessarily need for there to even be a selective force or some wisdom behind it. Different societies just sort of told stories and acted them out, and then those
mm,
societies which happened to tell better stories did better and then better and then
mm,
you end up at this place where, well, the models that you look through are models which just happen to have worked for long periods of time. And so you have some kind of grounding of truth, and they're they're archetypal stories according to
mm,
Jung. Now, but the other level of analysis would be that um, cognitively,
mm,
so your own cognition, not socially, but cognitively, how do you approach this as an individual? Because there's a vast array of
mm,
very, very varying competing truths that have all kind of survived the test of time to get to the point where you're at. And this is where I would say that the approach would be to not pick any model, not pick a evaluative structure first or the information first. Take it all
mm,
in,
mhm,
because if you like I said before, if you have a evaluative structure and you then select information from that, that's um, you're going to be stuck to your evaluated structure. And if you take
yeah,
maybe I'm not sure if I'm saying exactly what you're saying, but you take the information first. So you take all the information, you don't
mm,
evaluate it, you just allow it to pour in, and then you just see once you've captured all the information, you can evaluate it. Then
mm,
the reason why that's distinctly different is that if you evaluate it, then you don't actually allow the information into your cognition. You filter it out first.
mm,
So
mm,
if
mm,
you don't filter it, then you just absorb it all, and then
mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm quite skeptic with those two. I certainly, personality-wise, I just go with the instances of knowledge before I categorize them. For instance, whenever with I mentioned this in the previous one with the keto diet. I need to try it first. I understand the concept behind it, but I before I kind of put that in my life, I or have a criteria of what is the best well-being for me. I would take that, but you know I would take that first rather than evaluate it. Rather than having a criteria right away before I implement that. So yeah, I think what the problem with having a tool first, I think it paralyzes you. Um, and as you said, you kind of get stuck with that evaluation. Whereas there might be a criteria that you haven't incorporated there, um, and it just loses the validity of your knowledge.
Now, of
So yeah.
course, the rigorous philosopher would point out that even that is an evaluation technology first. Like even the idea of not having an evaluation first is is its own philosophical argument that could
Mhm.
be argued, right?
Not having an evaluation tool. Sorry.
So like our concept of not having a filter through which we see information first is itself an evaluative structure. It's a filter to which we see information. So like, you know, we're kind of talking against people
Oh, fair enough. See what
who
you mean.
pick ideas. Now, I wonder if that's a fair contention though, because I my feeling is that it's the baseline state. This is what I would argue, sort of the anti against that philosophy that it is a its own evaluative structure. Like
Mhm.
it seems like it's the absence of an evaluative structure. It seems like it's the
Yeah.
absence of um
Yeah.
a filter.
Yeah. So. Mm, yeah, but then yeah, yeah. I agree. Would you basically what you're saying is the absence of evaluation tool is the evaluation tool. Um.
I mean, this is what that is what I think maybe they would say in philosophy, but I would kind of push back against that, basically to say that like it's if you had a different cognitive schema going into it, then it would be its own philosophy. But if you didn't have a cognitive schema, then it would just be the baseline. Like if you went into it evaluating things a certain way, evaluating things through a certain paradigm, then to not have that would be a its own philosophical structure. But if you don't have it, it's only a philosophy in reaction to another philosophy. But if there is no philosophy, then that's why I would say it seems like it's a baseline.
Yeah, but I'd say that then, by definition, you still went back with the Methodist. Methodist? I forgot the name. But I have to search it again. But you still go back to the instance of knowledge because if you don't have any criteria, then you kind of just you just went back um and explore a bit before you criterionize them. So I don't think that you've escaped it necessarily, right? So you kind of just went here and then you went back.
Well,
So
okay, yeah. But that's if you're only considering just pure philosophical that philosophy in itself is its thing, but there's also the neuroscientific element to it. So like philosophies exist in your neurology, but what does your neurology do devoid of philosophies? It just absorbs information. Animals
mm,
do this. They just absorb information. They just see things. They just remember things. They absorb it.
mm, mhm,
So, so it it isn't there a state to which there is no philosophical structure to which you're allowing your brain to just perceive things, view them, and take them
mm,
in. That's qualitatively different than having an actual cognitive schema,
mm. What do you mean by cognitive schema? Like
like a way of viewing the
your
world.
thoughts,
Like I
kind
think
of
there's
like
a
a
German word like a Weltanschauung or something. The German word which means like just way that you view, like the way you're viewing the world, the way you process information, the set of ideas and perceptions
like
you have that.
would that not be a simple empirical versus pure knowledge? Because you kind of just perceive things without actually processing it. Like is it not that case? Because rationality is em- I don't know actually. Is empiricism something that you don't process? So let's say have you ever watched a Charlie Chaplin film?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's without knowledge, without you can only see, you can only perceive what you're doing, but you understand the mechanism that the story, the narrative behind it. Um, so you're saying there um is your cognitive faculty like processing it um versus to actually just perceiving Like you won't know the narrative if you just see it, versus to you would understand the narrative if you have these cognitive processors. Is that what you're? Sorry, I'm lost now. Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I'm doing this is I'm wanting to support the um case for just observing things, like just
Mm,
not imposing a structure. This is something Jordan Peterson's talked about, sort of like the eye on top of the pyramid being the state of observing things as opposed
mm,
to thinking about things.
yeah.
And he I don't know if you've heard him talk about that, but he sort of outlined them as distinctly different. So like just observing things is, that symbol's printed on the US dollar of the
Mm.
eye on top of the pyramid. And he described this as
The Iophorus.
the eye for us, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the function of just witnessing as opposed to thinking about things. And so that's why
Mm,
to me it feels like qualitatively different to do
mm,
that as opposed to think about things, which is just to implement a cognitive schema. But I mean, I don't know.
mm.
This is maybe a bit, I don't know.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think. Well, it's a good question though, because it's something that you've observed. It's something that is you sensed for yourself. Like, how does that get processed, or can you actually avoid processing that? And um, to a certain extent, this is similar to um the illusion that the skeptics are, or the idealists are proposing, that there are some illusions that's being created in our head that is independent of that is dependent of the object, and it is not necessarily the case of the actual object itself. Like for instance, um, the stick in the water, it creates an illusion the stick is bent, right? So your brain is processing that, but it's not actually bent. Am I making sense? It's
Yeah,
your
yeah.
brain is like processing that as if it's bent, but it's actually not. It's just a reflection of whatever is going on to that whatever is happening, whatever is occurring to that reality. Um, so you're making a case of of just no. I would say no. Well, yes, certainly that our cognition can interfere with the actual reality, and I think this would go back to Kant, like phenomena versus noumena.
Hmm.
There is certainly a case that there's objects that is independent to us. I'm not sure if you would agree with that, but for me, it's certain the case that realism is true. Um, that we can perceive things even if the brain, it's not necessarily pers- um, interfering that that exchange. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
don't know where, where we're gonna go with that question. Um, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
well, I think you're right. Like the example, I think maybe that counters the idea that visual phenomena is sort of an absolute thing. Is that, well, some people are blind and they create a vision, they create a, a model of the world, which is not based on, you can have blind people, you can have people who can't hear, and they can
Mm,
both create a model of the world, and it's
yeah.
not based on any one of the things. And
Yeah.
presumably, you could have somebody, we've had this, people who are blind and cannot hear, and they
Mm,
also create a model of the world just through just feeling, which is never the ordinary function of a sense. You never feel through the world generally, but we can do
mm,
that just as easily. So it suggests that there is no like absolute sort of state where things map
yeah.
on
I think
directly.
so. Yeah.
Um,
Although I'm really careful with the idealism, because it can be a bit, it can go a bit radical. So there's a guy, Irish bishop, I think it's George Berkeley, and he proposed that I forgot the exact. I think it's full idealism, wherein our reality is just being God, just updating it every second. So the conversation right now is God actually planned that and is just updating it every second. At first I find that really ridiculous. The argument, but actually, it can be factual.
It
It
can,
can be,
right,
yeah. It's not
but
definitely, yeah, yeah.
but to
Sorry.
some degree it feels like a trivial distinction because whether or not it is actually real or it isn't real, the function is the same because the the the
Yeah.
critical thing about the material world is that what it is there's certain laws that material follows, and there's a
Mm.
certain relationship it has with time and space where it
But
exists in time and space. There's these certain laws of conservation of mass and these certain things which make material world material distinctly different from the dream world. The dream world is different because that is not a case that you can't sort of study things in the dream world and then
mm,
they conserve mass over time. Things will change dramatically. And so whether or not it's a dream or it's an actual thing, I don't know if that's a important distinction. It feels trivial. Maybe philosophers find it interesting to
mm.
analyze that and think about that, but it feels
Yeah.
trivial to me. It
It
feels like the
really,
same thing.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it kind of also defeats free will, isn't it? Like, if that's the case, then God is the one who controls things all in all. And you don't
Well, free
necessarily
will.
govern.
Now, I think I wanted to say this. I think at the beginning of the conversation, you said something about like Kant was talking about there needed to be a um there in order to know that there's things are causal, you need to see the physical world.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was going to propose that
No, no. Let me
a
let me let me let me correct that first. I think what it was doing is both are needed, not necessarily that you needed the physical, because he laid out the opposite of that. Let's say I'm having a conversation with you right now. If I remove the color, if I remove the texture, if I remove the smoothness, the roughness, or whatever that I can observe from you, then he is asking obviously the body would disappear, right? Now, would I be able to say that Josh was here? And he said, yes, yes, because you were still in space and time, right? And space and time is real, but it's something that you don't observe. So let's say it's 7 o'clock right now here. If I move that to 8 o'clock, then you won't be there. It's kind of like in Harry Potter, the invisibility cloak. Um,
I'm not understanding actually.
sorry. So what the previous point that I was saying, that pure knowledge is dependent on the physical world, that you can't observe. Every change must have a cause. You can't observe, you can know that statement, but you cannot appreciate it if you don't see that in empirical, um in a physical world, right. So that was my
Right.
first assertion.
Yeah. And I
But
kind of want to go into that too, but there's something which is a little bit tangential from that, but goes from that. Because I noticed, so when you say every change must have a cause, you're presenting the truth, but I feel like that statement, this is tangential, but that statement in necessarily contradicts free will because in
mm,
order for something to be free will, it has to be changed without sort of the same kind of cause. Like, because if you trace back things with a causal chain, materialistically, you view everything is happening as a result of just other things, leading to it. Somebody does something because they saw something which led to a cognitive structure, which then they responded from that cognitive structure. You never get to free will if every change must come
mm,
from a cause.
mm,
The only way
mm,
I think you can get to free will is if at some point you get to the root of something. Consciousness, as such as we romantically want to perceive it, consciousness is a starting point without a cause. That's what it necessarily has to be because if there is if
mm,
it's causal chain all the way back, you never have consciousness. This like I willed it. Your will is always just something previous to it.
mm. Yeah, but would you not say that? Wait. Okay, so are you making a case that consciousness is independent of every change must have a cause? Like it's completely like it's not. The reason why you think this way is not necessarily need the cause. Is that what you're?
Well, what I'm saying is this, that people like the idea of consciousness. Philosophers love this idea. People like the idea. The idea in itself that they like, the idea of consciousness
Mm,
is one that cannot exist in a causal framework. I'm not saying that I'm not saying this idea necessarily exists. I'm saying, but in order for
mm,
this idea to exist, you have to have some changes that don't have a cause.
mm, okay. Mm, yeah. Okay. Would you be able to give an example, like concretely?
Yeah. I'll give a concrete example. So in the
Yeah.
material world, everything has a cause, blah, 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 right? Now, if you take a dualist perspective that there's the material world and there's the spiritual world, you could view the spiritual world as having spiritual entities which are sort of in between worlds. They're part of our consciousness is part of the spiritual world and is um, part of the material world. And
Yes.
but this spirit that we're defining here, when you look at where it's coming with some of its decisions, some of its decisions are arising from itself. Now, you could argue back to this to say, well, it has a cognition, it has an internal structure, so they're arising from its own memory. They're
Mm,
a result of its own memory. But
mm,
that is again an argument which doesn't have consciousness. Everything is just causal. So you can have causal elements in the spiritual world as well. What I'm proposing is that the only time you get consciousness is if you have something which is truly originating from consciousness, which is
yeah.
not causal.
Yeah, but would you necessarily say that that's as a change? Like, is there anything that changed there? Like, is
Well,
it saying that mental state of change is arbitrary rather than necessarily a cause? Because I don't see the relationship of change in that
well,
concept.
any information sort of emitted from a conscious element must be a change just basically temporally because you know it's sitting there sort of
Yeah,
doing nothing and then at the next moment in time it's sending a signal of let's do this. That would be a change, a temporal change.
yeah. But then so I think there's a lot of frameworks that you can incorporate there. Like for instance, if you have, if you're hungry, your consciousness would be um, filled with food or any kitchen, refrigerator, shops. Um, so there's certainly a change in your biological um, mechanism that is necessarily for you to think that way rather than just arbitrary. So all of your states or consciousness can also be derived from change, not necessarily just random. But I do get what you mean though, because there is certainly like creative endeavors. Like if I'm um walking in the park and I just thought of something, um like is that necessarily change? Um, is that necessarily something that is it that arbitrary, or is that something that that derived from a change in my system, like subconscious system? Like we don't know that question to that. We don't know the answer to that. Maybe perhaps somebody in the future might be able to answer. But no, it's a good. Maybe it's
Well,
good.
what do
Yeah,
you think about consciousness? Do you think that consciousness is a result of many moving pieces and that what we call the conscious experience is just many causal chains all the way down? Or do you think there is a true consciousness, which
I
is
think it's
something which
both.
is non, it's both?
I think it's both. Yeah.
Wouldn't that imply just the causal network?
No, I think yes. I do. I
Well,
just because if
yeah,
we if
so
we say yeah.
okay, I'll just say that very quickly. Because this, so you say it's both. You have causal chains running all the way back. And if you say it's both, where a conscious decision is both influenced by something,
Mhm.
by a memory and by a conscious factor, that
Mhm.
conscious factor, if there is truly a conscious factor, if you isolate that,
Yeah.
sort of apart from the memory causal chain,
Mhm.
that is kind of what I'm describing as like something that just happens without any causal.
Yeah, but would you not say that that's something derived from the subconscious that just make itself known randomly? Because the subconscious does that. Um, it just certainly, whenever you have some memory, it just randomly just pops up into your head. So it
Well,
is
this is
derived from
yeah,
something.
yeah. This is on a theoretical level. Like what's actually happening is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is like what's theoretically possible to happen, because there's an idea that it's not even theoretically possible for consciousness to exist as such, because we can't imagine anything which happens. So this is the idea. It's like, well, if something happens, either it's random or it's causal. And in both those cases, you don't end up with consciousness. You just end up with more sophisticated machines. Like, do you know what the romantic conceptualization of consciousness kind of implies?
Yeah.
I'm using the word romantic liberally. I've never heard anybody else say it. So, like, the idea of consciousness, people want to think of consciousness as something which is not just the sum of its parts. It's like consciousness. It's like this this thing which was not. Um, People want to think about consciousness as like a there's a spirit to it. Like there's something which is not that, like there's a free will. So like if you go to free
Mhm.
will,
Yeah.
free will is probably a good way to describe it. They're very, very interchangeably linked. A free will decision, um, in order for there to be free will, like true free will, there has to be consciousness. As I'm describing
Mhm.
it, because if you decided to do something because of other things, that's not free will. It's still just right. So the
Mhm.
the problem of free will can be conceptualized as people will essentially argue that
Mhm.
free will cannot exist because there is no such thing as a non-caused change that isn't random. Either
Mhm.
it's random, which is not really free will because it's just arbitrary, or it's caused, which is not free will.
Mhm. I think what I've derived the definition of consciousness is so interesting because we're now gonna go to consciousness, which I suspect we're gonna take is a long while. I derived the meaning of consciousness from Roy Baumeister's course, in the Big Ideas of Psychology, because he laid it out there that we are different to animals, and the reason for that is because we think of the future, whereas animals don't. Right? Is that a fair? Yeah. Okay. Another thing is we have control over our biological drive, um, where most animals don't. Right? So if
Right.
we're hungry and we know that we're in a meeting, we're not gonna go and grab something. We're gonna stay in the meeting until and we're gonna finish the meeting, and then we're gonna go and eat. So right, that's fair. Um, and I forgot the others, but those two are the one that got stuck to me. So that's how I would differentiate it as would that be a fair definition of consciousness to you? Like parts, aspects of definition of consciousness to you?
Uh, the it's a correct definition of maybe some version of consciousness. I was specifically defining a certain kind of consciousness which invoked free will as such.
Yeah,
Um,
because
which yeah, which those don't invoke free will as such because they're still causal.
yeah, so even if those bits are can be interpreted as we don't actually have free will, what he's implying there is we do have a free will because of that consciousness. Even if you say, we are in the meeting and it's our conscious desire, this is independent of whatever motivational drive. It is our conscious desire and it's for our own benefit that is beneficial for me to stay in the meeting until, I'm not gonna eat until I finish the meeting. So that
Hmm.
is kind of like a consciousness, like a kind of like a free will. Like we decide to restrict the short-term pleasure for long-term gain. So, oh yeah, actually, no, that is the third definition, the third assertion. would you say definition? Yeah, it's short term for long term. Like it's no animals can do that. Um, but no, it is. I think it is a free will.
No,
To be.
I think that's a really, really important that's the definition of consciousness. I would say, like, consciousness in a working definition, which is useful, which actually allows you to describe different people as having different levels of consciousness.
Yeah.
Consciousness is how far into the future you can see. I would say that is what consciousness is. How far into the
Yeah.
future you can see. So
Mm,
different that definition allows everything to have various levels of consciousness, from
yeah.
even very primitive
Mm,
physical organisms to um, people in society having different levels of consciousness, where one of them is very much just instantly reacting to their environment. I think it's a very useful
mm,
definition. But it's the the definition of consciousness which allows for free will. Um,
mm.
I don't see how seeing farther into the future gives you suddenly a ability to have free will, because if you see far into the future, you're deciding from more information. But the strict philosopher would say,
Mhm.
well, but you're not at any point leaping from causal to uncaused.
Sorry, I don't get where are we getting there? Are you still refuting the free will part, or are you just making a statement about the definition of it?
Yeah, refuting the free will part, saying, so you were saying that that was kind of a definition of, like, free will is being able to
Yeah.
decide from the future. But I'm saying
Uh,
that, well, being able to see into the future, it's like being able to run complicated stochastic models that give you probabilities of what would be the best decision based on lots more information. But
mhm,
being able to run these models doesn't give you consciousness. Like, being able to make your decisions based on more information about being able to see farther into the future isn't really, at
mhm.
no point do you make that leap from just better causal decisions to conscious or free will conscious decisions.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I still don't know where I'm gonna go from there.
Hmm.
It's are you saying that um
Well, at the end of what I'm saying is basically this: is that if you want to, because people have a desire to invoke free will and consciousness as such, if you want to invoke that without just saying that it's the result of just sort of higher complexity of systems, then at some point you have to invoke a change which happened as a result of nothing, but it was still a purposeful change. It's kind of contradictory in kind of a logical sense. I don't know if it's contradictory in a logical sense. Like, can you have a change? I don't know, that
yeah.
like just kind of arises out of nowhere. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know.
So you're saying that it's not necessarily the case that you can have a cause for consciousness to emerge. Um, so you're still going back to the previous
Yeah, I mean,
argument
I
that we
think
had.
we can move on from that, because so, like, the definition of consciousness that you gave, I think, is really, really,
Mhm,
that's a very, very definition.
mhm,
Because that's where, to tie it back into what I was saying before, that's where I'm saying that the higher levels of consciousness, that, like, really high levels of consciousness, you start to be able to see. This is what I propose. You be able to see this idea I presented before of uh, evil as being not necessary. So evil being that social force of causing difficulties for ourselves so that we produce more creativity. That, I would say, if you can see sufficiently far into the future, there's no longer a necessity for that. I would say, so to sum this up in a very, very um succinct, just conversational way of saying it, like, consciousness is a scale, and if you have a high,
mhm,
there's no need for sort of like that thing I described
mhm.
of
Yeah.
arbitrarily impose difficulties.
No, no, no. It is. I don't want to give up on your. I still want to work on
Oh,
your
okay, okay.
yeah, yeah. Because like what Jordan Peterson said about um Moses burning bush, right? That is something that is beckoning towards you. So would you say that's necessarily something of a change, or is that necessarily derived from a cause? I don't think that's true. I think it's, the Bible presented it as a divine interference, that God kind of just, suddenly appeared to you. Maybe that's the archetypal of an angel appearing to you, delivering message to you that you are off to do this. Um, so yeah, I'm not denying, or I'm not completely accepting the fact that, the a priori, that is every change must have a cause, um, is certainly true in terms of consciousness, because there are some thoughts that pops into your head that is certainly seems random. But what my thing what I say is was it's just because we don't have an explanation to it doesn't necessarily mean that it is therefore random, and it's therefore it doesn't have a cause. So my stance to that is I don't know. Maybe at some point that we will know. But at the moment, I can't 100% sure to say that yes, it is definitely random and it is a cause of free will, that is innate and instinctive to us. But yeah.
Now the problem can be broken down kind of like it can be dealt with like purely logically, and like the building blocks of it. Um, so this is what I heard Alex O'Connor present this argument. What he said was basically, if something happens and it doesn't have a cause, then it's somehow really arbitrary. And I don't know if this is, I don't know, and so what you follow. So this logical progression he goes through. He goes, okay, so there's only two things that we can have is random and causal, because he's arguing against this sort of non-random, non-causal. Um,
Mm.
it, it sounds like you're talking about like I don't know, but um,
Okay, maybe I can describe that with the debate of name of physicists. So Albert Einstein and 1930 Copenhagen's debate. Neil Bohr. So Albert Einstein's proposal is everything to him is deterministic. So everything is governed by a law that x equals, x goes to y, and that should be the law. Is Neil Bohr is a bit more probabilistic. His case is, we have these rules of physics, laws of physics up in the universe, but there are some instances that a comet would crash into a planet randomly. So he's saying a probabilistic argument that certainly that we are governed and sustained, but there's still anomaly that happens, and would we say that that's random? I don't. Well, yes, maybe, but it's not necessarily the case. That's just, again, not just because the absence of explanation doesn't necessarily mean the explanation of absence, right? So it's just because it's random, it seems random. It doesn't mean that it's definitely random. We just don't know the explanation to it. If that's something that is kind of going towards
that's
your.
that's exactly it. Now,
Okay,
and to
right, right.
further the explanation, I think he's specifically talking about quantum state changes, and he's probably saying like just because we can't see what there is, there may still be a pilot wave guiding the because quantum states appear entirely random to us, but maybe there's not something random about them. Maybe there is something
Yeah.
causal about them. Now, but now what you presented though is the the two positions, right? The one of
Mm.
them is um deterministic,
Yeah.
and the other is stochastic. It's
Yeah.
random chance,
Probabilistic. Yeah. Yeah.
probabilistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And but at no point do you get free will as such.
Mm.
You only get either stochastic or or deterministic
Yeah.
elements that you could not perceive, but they are in themselves
Yeah.
determined. They're
Yeah. But that is the realm of physics. I think you can transfer that to our consciousness. Because there are some I laid out the deterministic impulses that we have, and therefore have those consciousness, should I say, desires or thoughts. But there are definitely some random, anomaly that not even random, I would say, free will that we definitely have decided. Yeah, I don't know. So
yeah.
I think it's more
Well,
on the prefrontal cortex. As we all know, is the control part of our brain, which I think what the Roy Baumeister is inferring that might be the brain structure of free will. I don't know. But that's how I derive or how I absorb the material.
now, so it does seem like you're at least allowing room for there to be things which are non-causal and non-random, sort of conscious factors.
Yeah.
Now, this is interesting because I, without even needing neuroscience or anything like this, like on a pure logical level, like can we conceptualize such? Because the argument Alex O'Connor presents is that not such cannot even exist in theoretical space, because this is the idea. So if something happens and it wasn't a result of a cause, then it must be random. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, so if there's a decision to make and somebody has this idea, which is a conscious decision that pops in, and it's not a result of a causal framework, then by necessity it must be random. And I would argue that maybe that isn't the case. I don't know. I mean, this feels like strange territory to me, because it's like, I don't know how to argue that it's not the case necessarily, but like it seems like something can be
Mm.
non-random and non-causal
Yeah.
and sort of an agent element.
Yeah, I think no, I honestly struggle with that conceptualization because again going back to my the quote is the absence of explanation doesn't necessarily mean the explanation of absence. It's just because it happens to seem random doesn't necessarily mean it's definitely non-random. It's just because we don't have an explanation to it. So I don't think we should um
But when you're doing that, though, when you're invoking that, just because you don't have an explanation doesn't mean you're not departing from the two paradigms which don't allow for free will. You're saying just because it appears random doesn't mean it is random. That's not going just because it is random doesn't. You're going from random to deterministic. You're not going from that to free will.
I think my stance would be I'm unsure. So therefore, I'm careful to choose sides. I'm not necessarily deterministic. I can be open to accept that there might be a case. What I'm in, saying is because of that. Alex O'Connor conceptualizing that is a lack of explanation. Is a lack of evidence, lack of reason. So how can you use that as a as a thought experiment when you don't have necessary validation for that. I mean, we're gonna go back to
It's
the Methodism.
it's just
Yeah.
yeah. It's a weird thing, though. It's a weird territory. I think the reason it's weird is because we are supposing something entirely theoretically that like we would expect to be able to at least be able to conceptualize, but we can't conceptualize it. Like we can conceptualize um random and causal things, but we're supposing that there's something which is neither.
Hmm.
But we can't even have a thought experiment that addresses that, which is a
Yeah.
weird territory, because
No, no,
the
no.
lack of a thought experiment
No,
makes it
there
feel
is
non-real.
there's an example of this, and I think this is really weird. Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief of History of Time, he literally said there that the Big Bang, before, because people were asking, every cause has cause, every change has a cause, argument, is saying, well, it could be that before the Big Bang there was nothing. So it is, they're not necessarily a random cause, and that requires faith, that requires belief, that requires, for me, the Dawkins are arguing the virgin birth is not true, um, because it's just not biological true. But why don't you refute that and say there's no evidence that the world began with nothing and then exploded into this, everything? Why don't they refute that? Is you can't explain that as well. Like, there's no explanation to it, and I think it's that is my worry with those playful thoughts that you can derive, um without a change from you can derive a cause without a change. Is that right? Derive a change without a cause. But again, I'm open-minded to it. It's just, for me, it's just not. You require faith to believe that, right? You kind of have to accept something, which I think it's more of a scale. For me, it's likely untrue, but I'm open to it. But it's just a weird, like you said, it's weird, it's strange, it's odd. Um, but there might be something we're gonna invent from there. I suspect not.
Now, yeah, I
Um,
have so many thoughts about this. So, like the Stephen Hawking's thing, I don't think scientists widely accept that idea. Stephen
yeah.
Hawking's maybe put it forward. It, like you said, basically the argument I'm presenting is kind of an argument against it. Um, the, I wonder if this phenomena, so we somehow weirdly want to intuit something which we can not describe. So it's not random, it's not causal, it's an agent factor. We want this to
Mm.
exist. Now, I wonder if the fact that we can't even conceptualize it is because it's in a category of those things which cannot be conceptualized. So I could I could propose that um
Sorry, how about this? How about God? Because that is something that is not necessarily coming from a change, right? God did it. Like, yeah, I suppose that there is someone who kind of manipulated the system. So, but it is, a random thing that comes into your mind.
but
You
I mean,
are,
even if you suppose a God though, like you can still push the question back into God. Like, well, then is God necessarily causal himself? Because,
I mean,
well,
he's outside in, yeah.
if he's outside of the causal chain, then but you still you I don't think invoking God or not God or beginning or like any kind of different metaphysics sort of changes the heart of the question, because the heart of the question comes down to, is there something other than causal and random? Is the heart of the question. Is it even theoretically possible? And this is where I'll just interject this really quickly. I wonder if the reason we only can see those two things is because that is the only two things which can be conceptualized. So like that's uh kind of like our cognition, like the like it's the only thing that you can process. This is what I'm hypothesizing. This is difficult to explain, but like so like that like creatures sort of evolve to map onto their environment, and so like if there's thistles, they'll sort of get thicker skin and stuff like this. So
Mm.
and you can view this phenomena happening at all levels of analysis. So I wonder if the 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 set of things which can be processed, thought about, can only be mapped onto those which things which are causal and or random. um because the other set of things, there's no cognition that can sort of happen to them, because they cannot be de because what our minds do is we deconstruct things so we can understand them. But
Mm.
the agent component I'm talking about isn't something which can never be deconstructed necessarily. And so perhaps our inability to describe it is simply a result of it not being something that can be deconstructed at all.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where I can go from there because I don't have any basis or references that I can um put it out there. So this is
What,
purely
what,
based on
yeah,
yeah.
what are your general thoughts about that, about consciousness and
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna go with whatever the definition of what I've learned from. But with the idea of you're proposing is um random, like I just maybe because as you mentioned, it's because my human mind um instantly presupposes that there should be a cause, and I'm like innately or just because of my human limitation that I'm just always deriving it from, because like um I cannot you know think that it's a possibility that it could not be someone from it is impossible for it to derive from something non-causal. um it's, I think it kind of is a kind of, I think it's a maybe it's a logical impossibility. Because if you say, let's put it in a mathematical equation. If you have, let's say, a outcome, a, a consciousness which is an outcome is two. Um, so you're saying that there shouldn't be a cause. So remove the equation, but you come up with two. I think it's improbable. I don't think that is something that it can be conceptualized meaningfully.
you said
Um,
logically, like logical impossibility. That's exactly the point I was getting at. So that's what Alex O'Connor said. This is the first time I heard
mm,
it. He said it was
mm,
logically impossible for there to be something which is not random and
mm.
not causal. He said that it
Yeah.
was logically impossible. I'm saying he said, but
Wait, is
that
it
is
that
the
what?
theory. What?
Wait, is that what he said? Is that what he said?
That's what he said. Yeah, that it was
Oh
logically
wow.
impossible.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
um, no. Oh,
yeah.
it's great. Great minds think alike. No, sorry, I'm flattering myself. But no. It's yeah. No, it's not possible. Certainly not. But I think I would still put up a case of God there. Because I mentioned this before. From the God is metaphysically unrestrained, but it doesn't affect the logical cohesion, not to trick us. And this is more Descartes. Um, I'm still open with that idea. I'm still open that there's a possibility that could happen, although for me it's unlikely. And if it ever happens, there might be something, you know, I don't know. I don't know where I'm gonna go from there. Yeah, it is logical. It's so interesting that
Now,
I derived that from mathematics, right? Like it just, I went to the equation. Um,
but
it's
how can this is where I was getting into it, because I was convinced by this for quite some time. I was like, oh, then free will is um theoretically impossible. It's not just like, you know, maybe impossible. It's like logically impossible. And I was convinced by this for some time, but then I started deconstructing that, and this is where I wonder, like, so like you kind of were presenting in your math equation, like you have four. Is it like derived from something, or is it just kind of appearing out of nowhere? Like there is no other alternative. But
yeah.
what I'm saying is like, just because we can't find another alternative doesn't necessarily logically imply that there isn't one, because
Yeah.
that is the framework of logic. Is basically what you do in logic is you go like, well, what is possible? What is possible that we can formulate? It doesn't seem like the axioms that derive this conclusion that neither are possible,
Mm,
um, that the axioms are able to consider things outside of those things which we can just conceptualize, because
mm,
it seems like the logical proof that shows that, okay, well, you can only have causal, you can only have this, that it's based on, okay, we can only conceptualize causal and we can only conceptualize random. It doesn't seem to
mm,
necessarily then imply that the things which we cannot conceptualize exist.
mm.
Because this,
Yeah.
what this really is banging up against right now is actually logic itself. This is right at the, because if you then suppose that there is free will, you have to suppose that there is something other than logic, which is really
mm,
bizarre, right? Don't you?
yeah, I, I agree. But I think we have to be careful with definitions, because I don't think you can insert a free will. I mean, I need to watch that video from Alex O'Connor, um, but I think I would be very careful to insert free will there, as in relation to you know, a random conscious thought that just comes up, because if you do have a thought that came up, like, is it free will for us? Like, for instance, is temptation free will? Is emotion a free will? It's not, right? So it's whenever something annoys you, you don't think, oh, I'm gonna get annoyed with that thing. It's just your emotion just suddenly just wraps up. It just comes up to you. So it's not necessarily free will. What is free will is your action afterwards. So it's I get temptation all the time. Um, but it's my action to avoid being, applying, or sorry, I'm losing my English now. It's my free will not to give in to those temptation, that stops it. So the actual emotion itself is not free will. It is random and based on subconscious and based on memory, I think. But even that is unexplainable. Yeah, what would you think about that?
Well, the conceptualization that you're presenting is the conceptualization of free will that people accept.
Mm,
But as you described, like, well, but then that's based on maybe random or memories and cognition. Um,
mm,
so like you kind of say like, well, the decisions you make are free will, and what I'm doing though is like tracking that all the way back, not to its most neuroscientific roots, but to the logical possibility of it, because like what you're invoking is this sense of like free will not being the causal part of it, but your own decisions. Now, like, I guess what you've said is that you would think that everything is deterministic. Like that would be what you would say is most likely, but you are also leaving room for the possibility that there is sort of an agent,
mm.
non-conscious
I would
element.
say
That's
not necessarily deterministic. I think more probabilistic and leaning towards,
right, right, right.
kind of like a 98% or 95%, no, 90% deterministic, and, giving room for some anomaly. Um, because I'm just saying that we have to be careful with the definition of free will, because if you say that the free will is something that comes up to your head, then I don't think that's a right way of defining that, because there are certainly, like for instance, I had the case with emotion. I don't think you can define emotion as free will, because it's certainly something that is experienced, but the experience, so the feeling that we have, the action that we do after the feeling is the free will. um right, so I think I'm
Now,
being
but
careful with the
but
definition of free will.
but free will, the definition. So you have this instance where there's something that happens, there's an emotion, and you react to it. Um, but oh, sorry, there's an emotion that happens, and your reaction is your free will, is what you're saying. Um,
So emotion itself is not free will.
Emotion
There's
itself is not
no.
free will, but what you do with it is free will, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But but this is what I'm saying though, is that um, free will, the definition of it is something which was non-deterministic. That's kind of the definition that people want to invoke in conversations about consciousness, is that free will is something that happened that's non-deterministic. You weren't forced to do it by the situation you were in. You had a choice. But
Yeah.
when we break down that choice neuroscientifically, we can go, okay, well, the choice maybe was just a result of memories or understanding, and then you end up back in deterministic place where at one level it appears like free will because you were just deducing it from memories and stuff. But then when you go into that, kind of from a physics understanding, you still get back
Mhm.
to determinism because you're going determinism or randomness. Either it's
Yeah.
the same, but they're not the same as free will. Deterministic and random are not the same as free will.
So actions for me is feel. I'm really careful with the definition of it because we're talking about consciousness and we differentiated what animals and humans are capable to do, and we concluded that there's consciousness is specific to humans. So an example that we agreed on is, for instance, I'm gonna give another example. Let's say a dog who's eating, um, he's having his meal, and if you stop that, if you interrupted the dog from eating, obviously the dog is gonna be upset. So if humans experience that, sorry, if you continue to upset the dog's gonna bite you, right? With us humans, we have that choice, and this is where I define free will. We have that choice, to whether or not to be angry at the person who's interrupting us eat our food. But with dogs, they don't have any. So emotion itself is, also with animals, and I think it's more biological. But the consciousness itself is innately human. So when I say the definition of free will, I'm specifically going towards that framework of, it's not the emotions, but it is, emotion for me is animalistic as well. It's like biologically driven, but free will is kind of like specific to us humans. Dogs don't think about the future and become like super dogs, or create a society of, mythic sophisticated art dogs, right? So it's only innately to us humans. So that's how I differentiate. For me, emotion is not cannot be labeled as
Wait,
free will.
you could also conceptualize it like there's scales of consciousness and that animals have consciousness, but maybe not as much. So, and just to ground this out in a practical example. So you could imagine that wolves generally don't exhibit free will, but then there were some wolves that were hanging around the campfire of
Yeah,
some Neanderthals, and
yeah,
maybe one of the wolf just had this free will. They had this conscious decision to just be a little bit less, less
yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
vicious, and then that decision didn't happen much, but it happened there, and then that resulted in the lineage of dogs that we
Yeah.
see. So where you can kind of get consciousness from non-higher order complexity, from kind of primitive conscious states, from primitive emotional states rather. But it just happens less.
But you wouldn't um override that to the definition in emotions, because emotions would still be different from that, right? So it's
No,
still a conscious
right.
decision after the emotions that makes it conscious. So yeah, maybe there is an extent of, no, I would say, because there's a behavioral psychologist named, which he escapes me, Skinner, right? BF Skinner. I'm not sure if that's correct. So he was the one who's training the um, rats to do certain task, which is purely based on behavioral. And I think to an extent, this is where they derive the pigeons train homing missiles from. Um, so would you say that that's a uh, conscious decision? I think it's more behavioral rather than conscious, which I'm not gonna delve into because it's just gonna muddle the water a little bit. But it is a um, biological behavioral training that they do. Maybe to an extent, maybe there's some consciousness there. Again, I'm open-minded to things. I'm not really 100% deterministic, but I think it's more biologically, you know, a routine. Like for instance, if you go to the gym twice a week, um, and like if you did that for 3 years, and for 1 week, there's like an event that's gonna happen to your place. Like you are from that ritual habit that you develop, it's like neuroplastics to your brain that tells you, again, I'm gonna go to deterministic. I know, I'm sorry. But it's still true though. You build that neural network plasticity that's that disables you to go, or kind of motivates you to go to the event, but you'd rather go to the gym because you've developed that habit, right? So it's a behavioral changes, um, behavioral training rather than a conscious
I'm not
or
sure if this dualism between emotion, um, or pattern and behavior and conscious decision can necessarily be clearly drawn because, think about the emotion relating to food, so like hunger. So this is something I feel that we see examples where it's if consciousness exists, it's consciously derivative in some sense because some people will feel far more hunger and they will maybe end up 1,000 pounds and
Mhm.
they're interacting with this primitive state, but like there is also a maybe a participation in this what the actual emotion is. And so, maybe other examples are more clear, like you might feel a rage emotion for somebody who cuts you off, but that's also derivative on conscious decisions because you maybe you maybe made the conscious decision to not be connected with society, and then
Mhm.
the emotions were kind of derivative of that versus somebody else who made a emotional connection to want to be more connected with society out of conscious
Right,
decision would
right, right.
feel less of that
Okay, so
emotion.
I do have a refutation to that because is refutation actually a word? I don't know. But I would like to refute that, and it's actually you interrogating me in this one makes me now question whether I'm deterministic, because what I'm gonna say right now is again deterministic, because when you say about hunger, there's a hormone called ghrelin, and if you're taking a big man's course, it says whenever you have more fat cells, you have the hunger hormone increases, your satiation is satiation to food is decreases, and the appetite increases. So you can still lay out a biological. Not, I don't think it's necessarily. Is it determinist? Maybe, but it's certainly biologic. So if you have more fat cells than a skinny guy, then certainly you're gonna be more hungry than the other person. So you're still gonna be influenced by. Okay, so I'm gonna connect that with Roy Baumeister, because Roy Baumeister seek ego depletion theory. So ego depletion theory is the one that controls your impulses, right? And it's an energy. There's a limit to it. So a person is fat would struggle to control itself because there's a lot of hormones that is um, competing against that that control impulse, the prefrontal cortex, um, versus to someone who's slim, right? So I think it's both. There is certainly a a case to be made that um, there are structures in ourselves that determines our actions, rather than it being completely random. Um, because I have seen fat people who have worked really hard to lose weight, um, but it's harder compared to someone who's slimmer.
Well, let me just provide some nuance to that. The attempt to do something may not be the conscious decision where the vital result relies. So, like, if you attempt to lose weight, what does that actually mean? So, like, you might attempt to lose weight, but still be holding on to cognitive models or ways of viewing reality that still lock you into that. So, like, let's
Yeah.
say, for example, you attempt to lose weight, but you still hold on to this idea that you maybe kind of a naive idea that like, well, I should sometimes sort of reward myself. And then this idea in itself kind of manifests perceptions about food which are kind of bleed into other areas. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, because
Mm.
my experience was that I kind of viewed food the same way the whole time, and then I was looking into health things, and I discovered sort of fasting. And what I realized was that, like, when I start, fasting and stuff like that, it isn't the case that I I feel hunger the whole time. Like when you go on longer fasts, you don't feel hunger the whole time. You start seeing hunger as kind of non-present,
Mm,
and you also realize, like, maybe I don't need as much food as I once thought. And so um those decisions, though, and the results of those weren't from like a kind of a
mm,
maybe a self-control type
mm.
place. It was my relationship with that has been more related to letting things go and stuff like that.
Okay, so this is getting a bit interesting because it's showing myself more, because I do would say something about the mechanism behind why you chose to fast. So when you intentionally fast, at the first level, because your body's trying to adapt to this homeostasis. Again, I'm going a bit more deterministic on this one. So if you initially go and fast, the first day is you would struggle, because obviously your body is used to have food, but then second or third day you kind of lose that appetite. It's because the mind is saying, um, there's no food. I guess we're gonna go and low, kind of like saving energy. How would you say that? Autophagy. Um, Kind of a survival mode. Yeah, survival mode. So you don't feel hungry at all. Like your appetite decreases. The body stops secreting those hormones for you to survive. Um, so it's still molecularly, come from our biological. Again, I'm now realizing I'm such a deterministic person, which may be true. I don't know. But no, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. You're just revealing
Well,
parts of me now.
I mean, like, so, like, you're thinking you're deterministic because you're talking about sort of, you're bringing up ideas that you've had before, and
Yeah,
they're yeah. But like, that's what I'm saying, though. Like, if there is a non-deterministic element, it can't sort of be the area of things that you can't conceptualize, because you can only, like, information in the way that we internalize it has to be information you take in and put into your tree of knowledge, and then to kind of draw from it. It doesn't mean that you're deterministically drawing from it. Like, there could be sort of kind of decisions, the conscious decisions from where to draw from at a certain time, or like, or if to engage in a certain area at all. But the source has to be kind of deterministic.
but then that kind of defeats your argument of every from your refutation of every change must have cause, because then the cause would be I read them and I know the knowledge, so therefore I ought to act it because I understood that these ideas are good for me, so therefore I would act on it. So
Wait,
if
can
there
you
is
explain that again?
So it kind of defeats your main refutation of the every change must have cause. Because if you go with the tree of knowledge and I understood that this is important to me, and I took that tree, or sorry, took that um, fruit of knowledge and use it, then there was a cause, which is me understanding the effects of it from a scientific research. So there was a cause. It's not completely random.
Well, you're saying it refutes me proposing a non-cause, non-random
Yeah,
event.
because I read it, and I therefore know that it's a
If
valid
if
scientific claim.
but the idea, though, is that, definitely correct me if I'm wacky on this, because these are things which I feel are very much at the end extents of my conceptualization. So I
Mm.
could be wrong about this for sure, even if I sound confident. But um
We're playing around with ideas, so well, I could also be wrong. So we're having a good time discussing. Yeah,
it's yeah, this is great. This is really interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Um so what I'm proposing, though, is that if there is a conscious element, a non-random, non-causal thing, an agent element,
Mm.
then you can have a tree of knowledge. And, like, you're saying, like, oh yeah, well, it's derivative of your motivation and your other things, but that's that's the only thing you can analyze. You can't analyze the part of that which was non-derivative, the agent element of it, the part that was pure consciousness, because that cannot be analyzed. So for everything, you can kind of like track it back to some motivational structure, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't two decisions where you could go down two different paths. You could go down this one or this one. Both had a reason to do it, but then you pick
Mm.
this one for a conscious reason.
Mm.
And then yeah, the
Yeah,
argument to that would be, well, it's random then. But the idea is that, well, could you have something which is not random?
yeah, but it's not necessarily random though. Sorry, it's not necessarily non-random. It's not also not necessarily non-cause because you, if you gather knowledge, you don't just you don't just read it from my testimony and say, this is true. You've analyzed it. You have this layer of analysis, and you know that the information is valid, and you applied it to your life, and the experimentation kind of concluded for you that it is a true knowledge, um, and hence why you made that conscious decision to do that. So I don't think it's necessary for you to choose the other way around if you know that it isn't good, right? So I don't think that. Let me share a book that I read, the ultra high processed food, because you mentioned about food. There are foods that are manufactured by the food industry that have a lot of artificial ingredients that makes you crave more food. So it's not necessarily um, our biological structure that's the one that make us have food, but it's also the fault of the food industry that adds some ingredients there in order to increase our appetite. So I have that knowledge in me, all right? So would I still therefore eat a cake? I think not. I don't know whether I still have a choice, right? I still have a choice whether to avoid it or not. But the likelihood of me, again, it's probabilistic. The likelihood of me not having a cake is higher because I know the validity of the knowledge that I gained. So it's still a cause. There's still a cause on that. It's not necessarily random. It's also not necessarily a um, non-cause decision that I made. So there's a validity in the knowledge, and I know that it's true, and I practice it, and that made me decide on things.
Can I try to maybe make your argument a bit more like low resolution and kind of worse, but to just maybe for me to try to interface with it? Or like, is it an analog to what you're saying, basically that, like, okay, if I have information, there's like always maybe a better or worse way to engage with it. And so like,
Mm,
if I know stuff about cake and in it not being healthy, and I'm sort of acting properly, there's kind of only one way to engage with that information, like the correct way, which is kind of like honesty and like looking at things which are truthful, and therefore there's no room for there to be like a not like for there to be a conscious element, because there's always a better path which is more derived from motivations which are pure love,
mm, mm,
bravery.
mm. Yeah, it's interesting that you put out love, because I do think that love is irrational. No, that's
Interesting. I think it's very rational.
okay. There are some cases of love that are irrational. Is that fair?
Well,
Or is it purely irrational to you?
I'd be interested. To me, it's irrational at many levels of consciousness. As I'm talking about consciousness, your ability to see into the future. That's how I'm defining consciousness, like how far into the future you can see. It's irrational at many levels, but if you have enough vision, I would say it's rational.
Right. So
And
would you say that saving a I'm gonna sound so evil in this one, but please, we're playing on ideas here, right? So don't judge me. Is it rational for us to save millions of pounds to save a dying man who's inevitably gonna die in the future. Inevitably gonna die the next month. Is that rational?
Well, there is a part of this that I'll have to just outline a bit because this is maybe a bit novel, but I think quite important. And it's this: there is a it seems at first an irrational perspective, but it is rational. So there's a perception that in order to keep your humanity, you have to kind of always act in the best interest of people. And let's break down what does that mean to keep your humanity. So like let's say you see somebody suffering and you think, well, I'll just end their life to whatever. There there there's maybe this like delicate um this delicate almost like the fuse and light bulb construct, very very delicate, I would say, of consciousness that is maintained by the continual act of seeking the well-being of other people. So if you get rid of that, the symbolic interpretation of that would be eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you rationalize away consciousness, you lose that human spirit that connects you with the love. And what that would play out. I'll give a very, very clear example of this. So let's say you are a god, you are a demigod or something, and you can create beings. And you think, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create beings, and then I'm going to hurt them because I want to. Now, then you go, oh, that's fun. But then you go back to your god society, and then you're interacting with other beings, and they notice there's something a bit weird about you. There's something about you which seems deeply psychopathic. Like you would, you know, because it seems that then you would be okay. You'd be open to these things. You'd be open to sort of a violent tendency. And the only way that you can not have that deeply psychopathic trait is to always be loving,
Yeah.
like to never not be. And that at the deepest level, if you are always loving, then you're not a psychopath. But if you're even once not loving, then you're entirely a psychopath because
Yeah.
it implies there was some rationality that allowed you to. So that's the logical.
Yeah, no, it's fair. And I have no refutation to that. It's fair. I'd say maybe to simplify it is the rationality there is to avoid you risking to become psychopathic, right? So it kind of lessens your capability of harming someone in the future because
Well, yeah.
yeah,
Kind of any rationality where you view human life as not important, that's based on your own cognition, puts you in a psychopathic state because you're then basing other things, humanity, off your own perception.
yeah. And if you put that in mathematical perspective as well, you would think that there's value, there's like a numerical value for each human, but it's not it's not really the case. I don't think that there's in the anime that I watch, Full Metal Alchemist, there is no there's like infinity value in human. Like any person, kind of like a Christian classic Christian thought that every person has has an image of God. So therefore they're infinite in terms of numerical value. So because what I thought initially was, killing this person or murdering this person would be beneficial to society because the government won't have to spend much money. So I kind of make that analytical, mathematical hierarchy value that would be beneficial for it to disappear and have the allocation of money somewhere else. But if you view humans as infinity of value, then that definitely won't play out. Yeah.
But the argument I presented, because you originally said that you thought it was unrational for them to be loving, but
No,
the
no, no.
argument I present is like a rational case for it.
Yeah, I'll take back what I said. Again, I'm playing out with words. I because I initially thought, or maybe I have forgotten, the irration the no, I haven't. No, in truth, I haven't thought about whether love is rational or irrational. Um, which is interesting because Jesus is the main representation of love, and he ultimately gave the greatest love. So there is a value, the like greatest love, right? So if the Bible would put it that way, then there must be value to love. That like there must be like hierarchy and value to love. So I just threw it out there, and for us to experiment about. So yeah, no, fair enough. I think about what I said.
When you make that argument, though, like, maybe this is pedantic, I don't know, but that it's derived in God, like, doesn't that to some degree, do you think, I don't know, this is interesting, but do you think that God creates logic? Like, do you think, because like I'm outlining that love is logical, but you could also say, well, some people will argue this, and I found it very interesting that Dr. James Ord, in his philosophy of religion course, didn't make this argument, because lots of Christians will make the argument that logic itself is created by God, and he supposes that, like, that logic is something which God is dependent
Mm,
on. But I've heard other people present the other argument that logic itself is something derivative of God, and I don't find those arguments particularly convincing. But then when you get into the conscious, like I was trying to present an argument for there to be something which is non-causal and non-random, that feels illogical. And so then when you get into, there seems to be a conflict between free will, like being able to argue for free will, and being able to argue that
mm,
God is logical, because that he's stuck to logic. Now I don't know if this is the weird thing, though. I don't know if the free will arguments I'm presenting are actually really anti-logic, or if they're just sort of outside of logic. Um,
mm.
but
Yeah. Um. So with what's his name, Augustine and Aquinas. I'm not sure if or I've talked about this. When they mean omnipotent, they means omnipotent in a logical cohesion. So you can't, God cannot do anything that is contradictory to logic, because that destroys meaning. Um, so I don't think that or was was or making a case that God invented created logic for us.
no,
The
he
other way
was
around,
saying,
that
yeah,
is
yeah,
dependent on logic.
right.
I think it's not necessarily dependent on logic, but it's more on it is logic, maybe. Um,
I think about logic, though, because logic people think of as a like a thing. But can't logic almost, because it's really the core of logic is the rule of non-contradictions. It almost
mm,
seems like to be illogical isn't to not be within the system of logic, but really to, um
mm,
now I'm being circular reasoning here, but to contradict yourself. So, like, if you do something that's illogical, what you're really doing is disagreeing with what you did. So, like, let's say you
mm,
say, mm, we're going to define this as, you set up a logical uh thing, and
mm.
then you don't follow through with it. You kind of break the rules of it.
Yeah,
It
let
doesn't
me
seem,
let me give a example, like a common example that we can play around. All humans are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Oh, sorry, Socrates is human. So therefore, Socrates is mortal. So
mhm.
yeah, let's
Yeah,
play it
yeah,
around
yeah.
a common example. So if you yeah, go on with your next
So
next statement.
you're
Sorry.
it it seems like all humans are mortal.
Yeah,
Socrates is
is
a
human.
human.
Yeah.
It doesn't even, to me, it doesn't seem like you're actually making a logical conclusion. You're not doing um sort of deductive reasoning to conclude that Socrates is therefore mortal. It seems like a tautology. It seems like it's the same thing as saying it. It seems like saying the previous things, it seems like actual logic is just tautology. It's just you have premises, and then those premises also mean something else.
Mm,
If that makes sense.
mm, yeah,
So like I'll say it like very clearly. So like 2 + 2 = 4. So
yeah.
saying 2 + 2 is the exact same thing as saying 4, is what I'm saying. It's like there wasn't really a logical step that was made. It's just that one thing is just a way of saying the other thing. And that seems to be the entire thing of deductive reasoning, is that it's
Mm,
just ways of saying other things. So you set up premises, and then those things necessarily imply other things. That's how that then the reason I'm saying this is because it seems like if you have that understanding, it isn't really weird that God would be doing illogical
yeah.
things. It's just that the things that he is the things that he is. It's like, or better than that, actually. This is why it's important. It's not that the illogical constructs that you can kind of build um are things that he can't do. It's just that you're like the grammar you're using to construct them, um
Mm,
you're contradicting yourself. It's like you're saying, okay, well there is 4, and then you're saying, or it's like you're saying A is 4, and then you're changing your mind. It seems like the logical constructions that people build to
mm,
prove that there's something God can't do, like build a rock that he can't lift. It
mm,
seems like they're problems that happen at the formulation level, not the actual doing level.
And yeah, yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment of it. It's not necessarily limitation. It's not a limitation problem. It is a formulation problem, right? So it's
Right.
yeah. So yeah, um yeah. You know, in George Orwell, he laid it out that um there will come a time when you have this totalitarian state, that if you persistently insist on a person, no, 2 + 2 is not equal to 4, 2 + 2 is equal to 5. And if you insist that on person long enough, there's like a psychological effect that the person would believe that 2 + 2 is equal to 5, even though there's no coherence to
Mm.
it. Yeah, so
I think that's
it's
interesting, but
dangerous,
not true.
huh?
Well, I don't know if that's true though.
Yeah, it's not true, but people would believe that.
No, but I'm
So,
saying I'm not sure if James Orwell is correct that people would believe that.
mm, I
Because
mean,
this because this is why though, because in any illogical formulation, it isn't that you're presenting something weird, it's that you're actually contradicting yourself. So this is why. So when you break it down, it's like um it's like at one time you say the water bottle has water in it, and then the next time it has water in it, and you say it doesn't have water in it. The person perceiving it isn't going to be able to accept that because it's incoherent. And by incoherent, it means that it's internally contradictory. So you
mhm.
can't base anything off it. So if you say, if you convince people that 1 + 1 = 5, they only understand that as far as they don't understand what numbers actually mean.
Yeah, but if you, I think what his argument was, if you have a tyrannical government that persisted for a very long time, the people will become uneducated and not be able to identify logic itself. Um,
Yeah.
is like, for instance, we're now starting on, there's 9 binaries in the world, and that there are 100 genders, and we believe that. But that's not necessarily a logical case. But there will come a point where if people insisted on the belief of the postmodernists that even logic, Nietzsche said that even Plato's universality, no, Kant's universality and Plato's, I forgot the word, that are humanly constructed, then people would not believe, would distrust the Greeks, would distrust mathematics, and would therefore would just create random theory, even though it's logically incoherent. So I think there is still a case that there will come a time, maybe in North Korea is happening, that people are working on logical incoherence without them being aware.
Yeah, it's possible to the point of kind of yeah, you can get into people can be educated almost in the reverse to where they start
Mm,
understanding things which is kind of opposite to the truth. That does make sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
If you fail to educate them at all about
Mm,
math, it's kind of yeah, it's a weird place of non. It's kind of more gnosis than actual knowledge. It's kind of like a way of yeah.
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure how long we've talked, but I think
Four
that might cause a
hours.
problem. 4 hours.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, but I think it would be good if we stop
I was gonna say the
there.
same thing. Yeah.